So, good afternoon and welcome to the new version of Learning Connects, the weekly appointments on social media of the European Training Foundation. Today, we are very pleased to say that for the first time, this conversation is not only taking place on Facebook, but is also taking place on YouTube and on LinkedIn. So we welcome our followers across all channels to follow the conversation and tune in, share comments, questions, and let us know where you are connected. And in case you have some comments for our guest of today, I'm sure she will be very pleased to answer and to interact with you. So let's go straight to the business, because today's conversation is part of our monthly campaign about the digital skills. And we're talking about an issue which is super relevant in these pandemic times, and it was relevant even before, but even more now. We talk about blended teaching, and to do so, I warmly welcome my guest interviewee, my colleague Jolien van Uden, Human Capital Development Specialist at the European Training Foundation. Welcome, Jolien.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jolien, for being with us. I'm sure that some of our followers might not be very familiar with these new words which are circulating these days. So when we talk about blended teaching, what do we exactly mean by that?
I think that's a very relevant question to start with, because actually when we talk about blended teaching or blended learning, we use a lot of different definitions, or a lot of different definitions are used. So it's good every time when you start talking about blended learning, blended teaching, to check what are we actually talking about. If we look at the definitions used, we see that some of the definitions are more often cited, more often used in literature. And one definition is, for example, from Graham from 2006, and stated blended learning systems combine face-to-face instructions with computer-mediated instruction. And then we have another one from Garrison and Kanuka, and they define blended learning as the thoughtful integration of classroom, face-to-face learning experiences with online learning experiences. And when you look at those two definitions, you notice two differences. In one definition, they are using instruction. And in the second definition, they're talking about learning experience. And of course, we could say like they're two sides of the same coin. And I think we need both. But we could talk about instruction. And I think if we talk about blended teaching, we are talking about the side of instruction. And we can talk about the learning experiences, which are the experiences the learners have. And then there's another difference between the two definitions I just mentioned. Is one speaks about computer-mediated instruction and the other one about online learning. I think that doesn't make such a big difference. I think we all think about, okay, we talk on the one hand on face-to-face interactions, experiences, teaching, and on the other hand, like digital, online. It could also be offline, but using tools, a computer on another device. One thing I especially like about the second definition is that they talk about a thoughtful integration. And for me, I think this is very relevant. It's not just about mixing two environments, but it's about having an idea why we use the different environments and how they can support the learners of the learners, the learning of the learners. And there's one thing I would like to add here as well, is that you see in the definition, they speak about face-to-face. And in one definition, they just have a talk about face-to-face instruction. In the other one, they mention specifically classroom face-to-face instruction. And I think from the vet perspective, this is interesting to look at this as well, because the face-to-face is not limited to the classroom. We often use the workplace as well as learning environment in the form of apprenticeships, internships, etc. So in vet, I would speak, if we speak about blended learning, it's the making optimal use of different learning environments. So the online learning, face-to-face learning in the classroom, but also face-to-face learning in a workplace.
Thank you so much, Jolene. And it's very relevant that you introduce the angle on VET, vocational education and training, because one of the conversation which we've run on these social media channels this month very often were about how to train people to be doing practical things, practical work, which were usually taught in a face-to-face environment through the digital media as well. How's the future going to look like according to you? Are there any best practices that you can share with our followers who might be inspired?
So I think it's important to differentiate between the current situation and the future, where we hopefully have more choice in what we will offer to the learners. Because in the current situation, where in many countries we have to close schools and the only option is distance and online education, we're actually not talking about blended learning. We are forced to use the online and digital environment for all the learning. But when we talk about blended learning, referring again to the thoughtful integration, it means that we really think about where does face-to-face learning have an added value? Where can digital and online learning maybe do better than in face-to-face interactions? Or where can it be additional supporting the face-to-face interactions? And I think it's true, like if we think about VET, digital and online education is often more difficult, because how do you practice certain skills? And we see that there are more and more possibilities as well to practice them, at least to a certain extent, also through the use of digital and online applications. But many of them are also still maybe too expensive, or we haven't developed enough materials to implement them. Examples would be like serious gaming, like simulations. We see now as well the possibilities for virtual and augmented reality, but I think for many schools that still sounds very futuristic. Actually, last 2 weeks I have been searching more for examples also in virtual and augmented reality. And although it's still difficult to implement at this point, I think it might not be as difficult as I had expected it myself. I thought, this is not possible at the moment. But if you use the real headsets and everything, then it becomes expensive. But you can already do quite a lot with a smartphone and a cardboard. And I think this way it's more on the effort is to develop the materials. And with this kind of digital tools, you will be able to also practice to some extent occupational skills. When we look at the future, I think the important thing is to create the right blend. So you start based on what are the desired learning outcomes, the learning objectives. How will we assess those? And what are then the best ways for learners to acquire these learning outcomes? And that's a mix.
Sorry, please keep on, Jolene.
I just hear an echo, but I think now it's good again. It means that you think, okay, for a certain skill, let me give an example. I remember one of the examples when at that time I was still working in the Netherlands, and we introduced the flipped classroom. I think it's a concept that many of you might have heard of. It means that the instruction, like the lecture you give usually in the classroom, you create a video, and learners can watch it before they enter the class. And this was in a nursing program. So the nurses had to learn how to inoculate, like how to vaccinate. I think very relevant in the current situation. And they said, we can better use the time we have at school to have them practicing it. So we give them a video with instructions on how to do it, which they can watch at home. They can use their smartphone, they can use another device to watch it. And then once they come to the class, they can start by asking questions, and then they can practice. And then the teacher actually has time to see what the students are doing and to support them developing this specific skill. So then they think, okay, it's a better use of our time to do the practice at school where we can coach them and to have them listening to the instructions at home.
Yeah, I think that there are a number of interesting points in your intervention that will shape the conversation for the next 20 minutes. But before I get inspired by your comments and we continue the conversation, I just like to welcome all those who are following, and I see that we are overwhelmed with comments and hellos. We have Karen from India, Bart from Uganda, Margarita from Bulgaria, Nishal from Mauritius, Aspasia from North Macedonia, Dana from Jordan, Sandra from Spain, Minir from Kosovo, Turbudayeva from Kyrgyzstan, Kazimov from Azerbaijan, Marina from Italy, and Maria from Cyprus, who also shared a comment. And we also have some first questions, which we will address in the next minute, so please stay tuned. I'd like to go back, Yulin, to what you mentioned as the principle of creating the perfect blend. Because very often, maybe during also the urgency which came as a consequence of the pandemic, I assume many teachers ask themselves, so how can I now deliver a training to my students? And very often, maybe also given the rush and the emergency situation, presumably many of them have transferred the principle which were driving their face-to-face teaching into the digital world, while presumably this could be thought and prepared in a different way. Isn't this the case, Yulin?
Yes, you're right. I think at the moment that we were forced to move to distance and online learning, there was no time to rethink the concept. But if you really start using the different learning environments, you start designing something. You take into account the learning objectives, and you think what are the benefits of each of the different learning environments and learning activities I have to achieve these learning outcomes, or to facilitate learners to achieve this learning outcome. And what you saw at the beginning of the pandemic, I think it was amazing to see how quickly teachers were able to shift to online digital learning, distance learning. But not that many teachers had that much experience using these tools before. We have been talking about it for a long time, but still we saw that the real use of digital online learning was limited. Like, it was growing, but suddenly everyone had to use it. But it's what you say, like, you do different things in an online learning environment than what you would do in a classroom. So a lecture might be different online, or there are different ways to provide instructions online. I think we also all know that meetings online are not the same as having real meetings in person. Sometimes it's more tiring to be in online meetings all day, where you just have you feel a different kind of connection. The same, of course, is with online learning. So you really need to rethink about what's the best use of the different digital and online tools. A lecture could be maybe much shorter and to the point, making a short interactive video. And there are many tools that can support the development of such videos. These are videos you can take using PowerPoint, your own presentation, explaining concepts, but there are also ways to already put questions there, like to stop a video and ask a student to answer a question. This way you also ensure that a student is focused when listening, because the student will know at one point, oh, I have to answer a question. It's a kind of check to see whether students understand the issue. So there are different ways to prepare for online. You could ask them to watch this video, and then maybe you can have an interaction or have an assignment or another activity where they work together with other students, or where there's time to ask questions or to have a discussion in a more synchronous environment. I also saw in one of the comments there was this reference to synchronous and asynchronous learning online. And I think that's an important element. And what we do a lot now by replacing the face-to-face moments we had usually in the classroom, we will now have Zoom or team meetings with the group where we have discussions. Whereas there are, of course, a lot of opportunities with digital and online learning to also support asynchronous learning, where learners can watch a video at the time they are most concentrated or when they feel like watching it, and they can take into account their personal situation.
Thank you so much, Yulin. I've shared with our followers also the comment we've received from Maria from Cyprus about what you just took into account in your reply on synchronized support. I think this is a very good moment to include some of the comments and questions we are receiving from the chat in the conversation. Karen is asking, I'm sorry, I will read it and then I will reshare it. How could we blend cooking classes in blended classes? Isn't it quite difficult to understand taste, aroma, and texture? And also do assessment if we talk about nursing practices you implemented in one of the Netherlands schools.
So I think it's really important to remember that if we talk about blended learning, it means that it's learning both face-to-face and online. So with cooking, you could have you could use the flipped classroom, for example. You could give instructions on how to prepare a specific recipe online. You could explain, you could make a video which learners could watch beforehand. And then once they come to school, they will spend most of the time in the workshop, in the kitchen, where they can cook the recipe, so that you can really support them in making it, but you will not have to use the same time anymore to provide the instructions. And another example, which might be interesting in this regard, is that you can use the online environment to link the learning at the workplace and the learning at school. So I know during this situation, the current situation, it might be difficult to have internships. But let's say that we are able to do this again, and learners are working in a kitchen, in a restaurant, in a hotel, and you give them a specific assignment. You could also ask them to take photos or make a video of what they are doing in the kitchen during their internship. They can upload it, and you could see what they have been doing and could use some of the examples of the learners in your next class, where you will reflect. You can ask questions. What was difficult? What was easy? Do you have questions? So you can use the materials they collected at the workplace during your teaching in the classroom. And this way you use the online environment to really link the learning in the different locations. And then the second part of the questions about the nurses, like they would still do the exams. In this case, in the Netherlands, they do them in the hospital, so in the workplace. So the exams wouldn't be online. Here it was about having the instructions online available so that you would have more time to practice when they are at school or in the workplace.
Thank you so much, Jolene. I'll try now to move to another comment, which I've seen earlier on from Bart. I would be very interested to know more about augmented reality via smartphones. I don't know if we want to go into this technical question, Jolene.
No, I can just say that it's not exactly the same, but it provides similar opportunities. You can use similar software. So this way you can create a different learning experience for learners. For example, you have these, you can use augmented reality where you can have objects which you can make more visible, like in 3D. You can see through them. You can show more than you would be able to show on a PowerPoint, and it reacts like a learner can discover, can walk around an object or pull it apart, see how it works, try to put it together again, things like that.
Thank you so much, Jolene. I also see another interesting comment from Christine. During COVID, it was more an emergency remote teaching rather than real digital online learning. Moving to digital online learning takes a lot of time and requires planning. So presumably, Jolene, we should be working ahead already now for the next years and have a vision rather than an emergency response. Isn't this the case?
Yes, that's the case. And we also see that some countries start working on blended learning strategies. I think it's right. You need time to plan. It's actually something you start with once you start developing your programs, your curricula. When you look again, okay, what do our learners need to achieve? What are the best ways for these learners to achieve these learning outcomes? And it can also differ per target group. Like it might be different for adult learners than for learners in initial VET. It might depend on the background of the learners, like how experienced are they in using digital and online tools. I mean, we are all way more experienced than we were a year ago, so this provides opportunities. And I think we should take this situation as well as a moment to reflect. We have now 1 year experience being forced online. We know that some people are really tired of it. They want to go back to face. We see here students in Italy protesting because they want the schools to reopen. But there are also learners who are really satisfied, who enjoy it because it's more quiet, they can concentrate better, or they can choose when to learn. It depends on the activities we have been using, how much we were able to engage learners. So I think we should take this moment to reflect, okay, what are the benefits of online learning, and what do we really miss about the face-to-face learning, and how can we use this to create more engaging and meaningful learning environments for our learners.
Thank you so much, Jeline. I see there's an interesting question which actually we had already foreseen discussing in this conversation. So not only about, starting from the learning outcomes and preparing a learning proposal, but assessment. I see Nishal is asking, is assessment of learning outcomes acquired online in an online mode different from the traditional mode?
So also here it depends, I think, on the kind of learning outcomes you would like to measure. It depends on many questions. We had a webinar on summative assessment in May last year, just after the pandemic started, because there were many questions about how do we organize the end of year assessment. And in November, we had a second webinar also reflecting on what the countries who had presented their approach in May, what they in the end really did. And we saw that it was difficult to organize it online. And there are many reasons why it's difficult. Already for the practical part we discussed before, but also if you have the more theoretical part. I think in the end, it's not an aim to do everything online. It's about finding the perfect blend. And I think where online learning can have, for assessment, really have an added value is for formative assessment. And we also saw in one of our webinars, on the webinar on formative assessment, an example of a simulation. It was from Georgia, and you can find the video on ETF Open Space. But what it shows is that simulation can provide immediate feedback, because then as a learner, you're trying things out. And if it doesn't work, the simulation will say, you will not get the expected effect. And if there are strong simulations, they will also support the learner. So once they make mistakes, they will say, oh, here you can find some additional instruction, or maybe you should go back to this topic and read it again. And then they can try again. It's also often a safe environment to keep trying. And if they are very well developed simulations, there's often also information for the teacher. So as a teacher, you can see what kind of mistakes learners are making. And if you see that the learner makes the same mistake, you could explain a concept again to a learner. Or when you see that many students are making the same mistake, it could mean that maybe you have to go back to a specific topic, or to explain it in a different way, or to give it a bit more attention. So it can be a very powerful tool for formative assessment and to support the learner in the learning process.
Thank you so much, Jeline. There is another very interesting question on, I think, one of the aspects which is at the core also of the action of the European Training Foundation, which is an EU agency which is working in the countries neighboring in the European Union and to support them reform education and labor market system. And this comes from Mohammed. Do you think this is applicable also to construction vocational courses, considering that enrolled trainees are from low achievers of basic education? I mean, can blended teaching be also inclusive?
That's an important question. I think it's one of the issues often raised, and especially now, that it's not always inclusive. And we talk about the digital divide, and that maybe even more than before, now we have to move everything online, that some groups of learners are excluded. And I think this is something we always need to take into account when designing blended learning, and when we have the choice again, or the space again, to make our own choices. So now we are forced to go online, but once we go back to a situation where face-to-face learning is also possible, we need to make informed choices. We need to look at the learning objectives, but also at the learners. Do they have the infrastructure, the devices available to access online learning materials? Do they have the skills to use these tools? Also, attitude is very important. We've seen in research that people with a negative attitude towards the use of digital and online learning also often have like lower learning outcomes. And here it's important that we support them to build confidence, to be able to use it and to have access. And these are different things we will have to work on. We see it also in the digital education plan from the EU, that they try to address these different topics, because it's not only about infrastructure, connectivity, it's about having competent and confident educators. And I think also the last Facebook live event was about this topic, and the quality of the learning content, user friendliness of the tools, availability of learning platforms. So there are many things to take into account to make it as much accessible for everyone. And we have to work on all these different aspects to make digital and online learning inclusive. Also, on the other hand, sometimes it can make learning more inclusive. What if you want to follow a training in a city, like you live in a more rural area, and the city where you would like to follow your training is far away, and you have a device, you have a connection. Maybe this provides you with an opportunity to follow a course online, whereas it might be difficult to follow this course when it's not offered online, because you have your family to take care of. Maybe you are working at the same time as well. So it also offers opportunities.
For sure, the context in which training is being delivered, both from the trainer's perspective and from the also, or when it's where it's received from the learner's perspective, does have an impact, because many of us are from home, working from home in this phase. There is one last question which is in the chat before going closer to the wrap up of this conversation, and it's from Volker from Munich, Germany. What do you think about virtual reality and augmented reality? Do you have any experiences in the learning process? Is it just hype driven by technology partners, or is it a real useful and economic trend? A provocative question. Thank you for addressing this.
Yeah, I think it's not just a hype. But with the other digital and online tools, we need to see where it has an added value. And I've seen some examples recently. One example was, for example, on hybrid cars. So for auto mechanics, these cars are very expensive, and like the technology changes every year. So as a vet college, it's very expensive to get these cars. And here they had the sector who was investing in virtual reality, in headsets, etc., and in the software to be used at schools, at vet schools, to give students an opportunity to work with these hybrid cars. And then yes, it's expensive, but I think a hybrid car in the end is even way more expensive. And the benefit is that you can more easily update this software than to have a new car almost every year. And a second positive side aspect of this was that it can be dangerous to work with these hybrid cars because you work with electricity and you need to ensure that it's not dangerous. So it also provides a safer way of working, of starting working with those cars. And then once you've learned how to do it, you might have an internship at a workplace where they have these cars, and you have already practiced working with those cars in this safe environment where you can't get electrocuted by accident.
And I'm sure Jolien has a very positive, also personal approach to this, because she's a great cyclist, and she's also training in the virtual world. So I think that even from a personal perspective, this can be a further endorsement to this. I think we are approaching the end of this conversation, but I have two quick questions from Jolien. The first one is why is the ETF dealing with blended teaching, and why is this relevant for its mission and its work in the neighboring countries?
Yes, so we would like to support learning and through the perspective of lifelong learning, so throughout our different learning experiences. And one of the important aspects, of course, is that we create positive learning experiences. Like when we are motivated, it's more likely that we learn more. It's not automatically leading to better learning results. It also depends on the content, etc. But motivation helps. And when we create positive learning experiences, it also encourages people to start learning again later throughout life. So positive learning experiences are important. And also what I said, like if we want people to acquire the necessary skills and knowledge, we would like to provide training programs that facilitate learners in the best possible way to acquire these learning outcomes. And as we saw, like many countries have been starting introducing dual systems, work-based learning, because we see the added value. There are things in the workplace you can't learn at school. The same is for digital and online learning. What I said, you need to think about how you can use it and what's the added value. You shouldn't introduce it because we need to have a blended learning environment, but we look at these possibilities digital and online learning offer to create a better learning experience, to better support the learning process of the learners. And what we do as well, like at ETF at the moment, we have started the Creating New Learning project. And in this project, we look at innovation in teaching and learning. And one of the important elements here is also the use of digital and online tools in different ways.
Thank you so much, Jolien. So to close the conversation, this is a surprise question. Let's imagine that we had to create the recipe for the best blended learning. What would be the 3 key ingredients?
For the best blend, this is. I think what is a very important ingredient is to have teachers who are competent in developing programs, in using the digital and online tools that are available. And then one of the ingredients, of course, is also to have the infrastructure to make things accessible for everyone, because only then everyone can make use of the added value digital and online learning can offer.
Thank you very much, Jolien. So I thank my colleague Jolien van Uden, Human Capital Development Specialist at the European Training Foundation, for having participated in this conversation, which for the first time was shared across our Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube channels. And I'm really thankful also to all of you who have participated super actively in an engaged way. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your questions. Like Jolien mentioned earlier on, please do not forget to go on our open space platform. My colleagues have shared the link in the chat. It's a community which is addressing you who are following this conversation, and you will find also the resources which were shared and mentioned by Yolene earlier on. Thank you very much, all of you. Please come back next Wednesday at 4 p.m. Central European Time for another conversation on the field of digital skills. It was great to have you on board. Thank you so much, Yulene.
Thank you for inviting me here.
And thanks to all of you following from home. See you soon. Bye.